Hi, I'm Stuart Maconie. Join me talking to Jason from Spiritualized about their new album Let It Come Down and why they decided on that fantastic orchestral sound.
We made sure that the people that played on this record were great at what they did. We kind of chose first violins from various orchestras rather than an orchestra. So we kind of got the better of each violin, the flautists, right across the board. We tried to get the best people.
Jason from Spiritualized on their new album Let It Come Down. Don't miss it. Hi, I'm Stuart Maconie. Join me talking to Jason from Spiritualized about their new album Let It Come Down and why they decided on that fantastic orchestral sound.
We made sure that the people that played on this record were great at what they did. We kind of chose first violins from various orchestras rather than an orchestra. So we kind of got the better of each violin, the flautists, right across the board. We tried to get the best people.
Jason from Spiritualized on their new album Let It Come Down, right here. I'm talking to Jason from Spiritualized about Spiritualized's new album, Let It Come Down. So I suppose a good question might be to ask, because people want to know this. What have you been doing since 1997?
Is that how long ago, 97? 4 years, 2 years touring.
Yeah.
So that kind of eats into the time, and I think it's unrealistic that people talk about bands putting albums out every year or 18 months, and that kind of assumes that they're not as involved in the making of the record, or they kind of compromise maybe what they're doing because they don't get any kind of second shot if you're on that kind of deadline. And I guess more so than any record I've ever made, I wanted to really push the boat out and do something that I'd never done before. I wanted to arrange all of the orchestrations, I wanted to arrange all the parts that were on that record, and that took the most time. Before I even hit a studio, I had to transfer all my ideas from dictaphone tapes to music scores, and I don't write music.
So you had dictaphones on which what? You'd hummed into or whistled into?
I had the tunes, and I had some of the key lyrics on dictaphones. And then, I know that sounds kind of vaguely simple task, but I don't even play piano, so every note had to be tested against all the notes around it. So it took time, and the guy who sat with me through it had an awful lot of patience.
I was going to say, so how did you translate it? Because presumably you need to have charts, as they call them, or for the string, for the orchestration.
I wrote them first for a piano, and then wrote all the parts off of that. And then somebody, actually Martin from the band, came in and translated what I'd got as musical pieces from the computer that I'd put them into musical scores for the band to read. But it kind of meant that the album existed as it sounds prior to the recording.
Yes.
Which is something that I'd never really recorded like that. I'd never attempted anything on that kind of scale before.
That's a track called Out of Sight. You can kind of tell in the sense that it sounds like a grand vision from someone's head rather than, a band riffing. Do you know what I mean?
Although that was kind of the way I was going to go anyway with this record, I was kind of forced more in that direction by the fact that I didn't have the original band that I'd been working with. So to try and get people in to immediately play kind of free music off of each other, which is quite a basic element of this band, wasn't in place when we made this record. So that whole part had to be eliminated. And the other thing I really wanted to do was to make a Spiritualized record that didn't have the kind of key sounds that make Spiritualized, so as in drones and tremolos. There are tremolos there, but they're played 16 beats to the bar by French horns. They're put in as parts of the orchestral sound rather than as kind of, like phase effects. Or I guess say like the last album, Ladies and Gentlemen, We're Floating in Space, it already, before you even start listening to the songs, it's already kind of beamed in from somewhere else because it's got a kind of it's got a transmission sound on it. It's got that kind of sound to it, and I kind of wanted to see if we could create something that would stand up without any of those kind of references. I can make 10 records like Ladies and Gentlemen now because I know how I made that record. I've gone through that learning process to make that kind of sound, and there's kind of no purpose for me to do that. It's just treading water. Wherever you tread water, it doesn't matter where you're at. If you remain the same, that's all you're going to do. And I'm just incredibly ambitious, and it's a personal ambition. It's not about how well the record's received, because that really doesn't doesn't matter a bit to me. All the records are as good as they're ever going to get.
Many people will assume, will take that you are spiritualized. I mean, how does that make you feel? I mean, it is your vision or whatever, but is that doing down the other people who are involved in it to say...
Incredibly so, yeah.
Right.
Even in that, say, the people who played the strings, Ed Coxon, who brought the orchestra in, is phenomenally good. And it's kind of like we made sure that the people that played on this record were great at what they did. I don't think this record would sound half as good if we used different string people. And we kind of chose first violins from various orchestras rather than an orchestra. Wow. So we kind of got the better of each violin, the flautists, right across the board. We tried to get the best people.
I think the strings that you've mentioned there, I think a lot of pop and rock records, you can tell, use strings as an afterthought to dress up a tune. That they, let's have a bit of ersatz, let's have a bit of fake glamour and all sentiment on this or whatever, and we'd have some treacly strings. And what I really love about this record is this. It seems to me that the orchestration is really intelligent, and not just for that very obvious reason. Like, they're not an afterthought, are they?
There were samples put in right from the demo stage because they were the lines that I'd written, and they were written as string lines or horn lines. At one time, I was thinking that we should get an arranger in to arrange my arrangements, to put them into a kind of proper musical vocabulary, if you like. And John, at the time, who co-produced it, John Coxon, was adamant that I didn't do that, because part of what made this record was the arrangements are wrong. If you're viewing it from a kind of, if you go to school to learn arranging, you don't put kind of like quarter tones in together. You don't kind of I've got the horn section playing at the very limit of their register. And that's kind of stuff that I like in people like Gil Evans, that you've got the flutes playing low stuff, the French horns playing the high stuff, and it kind of makes even instruments that you are familiar with less familiar.
There's a lot of horns and well, I don't know if it's brass entirely, there's certainly a lot of horns on the record. Does that reflect a particular enthusiasm of yours?
I think the most exciting thing about Spiritualized is live, and that idea of pushing air around. That's something, when I was working with Jim Dickinson, he was talking about pushing air around. Music is basically about pushing huge amounts of air around. So if you're using live instruments, especially horns, you're really moving that air kind of thing. And I think the French horns was more from a Gil Evans perspective, that they sound incredibly sombre as a tone, and yet it's still a very powerful instrument, but they're kind of horns without the brashness of reeds. So a lot of that came through listening to his kind of stuff.
That was a track called Stop Your Crying. As I was saying a bit earlier on, I think as a kind of mental tag they've got, people would say, Spiritualized, it is a left field kind of music. It's whatever you want to call it, alternative music, independent music. But what I think really comes out of this record, the richness of it, is that it's steeped in the history of popular music, in the sense that I can hear bits of, you can obviously hear gospel in there, but I can hear Jim Webb, you know what I mean, and that kind of stuff. So it isn't sulky, student, outward-looking music, is it? It seems to be music that's really steeped in...
I just think that a lot of contemporary music, aside from being really conservative, compares itself to its peers.
Yeah. And
in the making of this record, I didn't play a single contemporary record. I'm more interested in putting this record up against Hendrix or Ray Charles, or I kind of go through everything. I put this record up against Patsy Cline, which is kind of, just in the amount of people involved, the polar opposite. But I want to make records that stand up to the records I love, rather than just kind of, stand out from what's happening at the moment now. Because I'm more interested in somebody finding this record in 30 years' time than I am about shifting units, and that, whatever comes with the business of records.
Yeah.
And I think that if you do that, if you do compare yourself to your peers, the heights you can achieve come down considerably. And I say especially now, because music is so conservative. It's so kind of, I guess, mainstream music is, it just doesn't want to cross the line. It doesn't want to sort of reach out and see if we can find a different way of making sounds or writing songs.
It's an incredibly emotional record, and I guess reviews will say it, and it's a bit glib to say, but it's kind of redemptive, and there's that sort of very deep sadness. It strikes me that emotional quality of that kind is something that's disappearing from modern music. Is that kind of uppermost in your mind as well, to make music with a really emotional charge?
Only in that's what I get off of the music that I like.
Yeah.
And kind of being honest about myself as well when I'm doing it. I'm not writing outside of my experience. that is the most important thing about music. That's what I enjoy when I listen to other people's music.
This is Stuart Maconie with Jason from Spiritualized, and we're talking about their new album, Let It Come Down. More from Jason and me after this. I'm Stuart Maconie talking to Jason from Spiritualized, and we're taking a look at their new album, Let It Come Down. There's been a lot of lineup changes in the band since the last record, and how does that affect the dynamic of the group? I mean, when you're composing, I guess, it's just you. How quickly does it become something where you've got to work off other people, and how the lineup changes change what Spiritualized do?
The lineup change this time kind of came at an opportune moment. It kind of came at the right moment, in that this was always the record that was going to happen, regardless of, you know, this is something I really thought that would test me and test what I could do. But it's more put on the people who come into the band, that they realise that there is a kind of framework that goes and there's something that doesn't go. But in saying that, I don't tell people. I don't say these are the kind of ground rules, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to listen to, you know. People either get it or they don't get it.
Yeah.
I think this time around, you know, again, I've probably said that last time we had a lineup change, but this time we've got people who really do understand what can be done and what can't be done. Is
it a quality of mind rather than a quality of chops or licks or whatever, do you think?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It's not about ability. It's not like we've got, you know, the best players. I've said that about the violin players, because you don't really want somebody playing in a violin section who can't really play the notes and play them well. But within the band, it's more like if you play fantastic country guitar, you've got to be better than any guy in Nashville. You've got to be better than the better of those people, you know, better than the best. If you kind of hone that down to what we do with it, then you don't have to have that kind of ability. You just have to have that kind of passion. And I think you can put that into your playing without being able to, you know, play faster than the next guy, or, you know, more notes or whatever. Yeah. This album was incredibly difficult to get together, but it's kind of effortless the way it comes off of the finished CD. It's kind of not about being clever or having great ability. It's about putting that across and people picking up on it.
That was Do It All Over Again. Did the sound of this record reflect anything new that's come into your, you know, your musical life since the last record? Are you still going back to the same sources that you've as inspiration, or is there any new enthusiasms that you have?
That's kind of difficult, isn't it? Because that kind of says you like that. Also, by saying, this is more about this kind of music than that kind of music, it kind of negates all the other stuff that's gone ahead. I think this is a kind of everything that went into the last album, taken to, you know, with a sort of huge ambition for what can be possible. And it's kind of odd, because at the end of the last album I thought we were going to be doing a lot more stuff like No God Only Religion, more kind of free jazz, which is also based around horns and that kind of stuff, but it certainly isn't that record. No. So it's hard to say, but it's hard to say, well I heard I didn't hear three records that sent me on this way. It was kind of it was just something that kind of evolved that way. And also that the more you push things out, the more you do things that surprise yourself. Yeah. I mean, I said years ago that if you aim to make an Electric Ladyland every time you make a record, even if you come slightly short of that, you've still got something way up there. Yeah. And I think that most people don't do that. You know, they kind of say, well, let's do a record that sounds like this contemporary band or that contemporary band, or, you know, as long as there's elements in that, then we can sell some records. Yeah. And that's sort of the last, like I said, the last thing on my mind is even getting a reaction to the record. It's the furthest thing. I'm finished now. I'm happy. I'm successful because I've got that record. Right. And anything else that comes aside from that will only enable me to do bigger and grander shows, or to achieve my ambitions next time. It's not about all the mechanics of that kind of grind into operation now. Yeah.
So you're saying that posterity rather than the charts is your motivating factor at the moment?
Well, the charts represent how fast you can sell records over a period of a week generally. How many you can sell within a week. There's been very few records that I've bought on the back of a chart placing. I've bought them because I've found out about them at a later date, or because it's good music. You know, the fact that it charts or it doesn't chart doesn't really enter into it. And I'm quite surprised by some of my older records that some did chart, some didn't, you know, or some were huge sellers and some did absolutely nothing. There's nothing in there that denotes this is good, this is slightly inferior or whatever. The charts is completely alien to what music is actually there. It's about investment and return. It's about speed of sales, and It's got nothing to do with making music.
It's almost too obvious a thing to say with a name like Spiritualized, but there's a deep spiritual quality to the music, isn't there? Except not in the conventional sense at all, as it were. Does that reflect things, wrangles that go on in your mind all the time?
Does the name reflect that?
No. Does the? I mean, in terms of a modern rock record, for want of a better word, although I know that's a kind of insultingly generalised word, but Jesus and God and the Lord are invoked time and time again, and yet it's not what most people would think of as a religious record. People are used to,
It's not a religious record, first and foremost, but I don't mind that if people do feel that from it.
Yeah.
If they have religion, I don't mind if they get a bigger dose from the stuff on this, but it's not. It's more that a kind of love for gospel music and loving the fervour of it without really understanding the kind of message at the
right.
At the core of that music.
Yeah. Is it like a hymn to music itself then?
More so, yeah. And to kind of not just the emotive power of music, but to all that kind of emotion that comes into you, whether you listen to music or anything that brings those kind of feelings into your life.
Yeah.
So it is like you can listen to gospel music and feel incredibly charged or incredibly moved by that without having religion.
That was On Fire. If someone would say to me, well, how does it stand in relation to Ladies and Gentlemen, We Are Floating in Space? Well, it seems to me that it's not like, there's a very obvious different tack it's taken. It's not like, he's obviously discovered, I don't know, the Baroque lute, or you know what I mean, or there's not a very obvious British folk rock of the 70s or something like that, but there is an indefinable difference, and I don't know if I think it might be slightly grander and richer without not in a, but I mean, is that reasonable? How would you characterise it if someone would say to you, a crass question, how's it different, how's it changed, what is different?
I think I'd have the same problem.
Yeah.
It sounds like a Spiritualized record, undeniably, and it does sound like a big recorded session. The thing that I thought was very important of this was that, like you say earlier, I didn't want to have strings for 2 tracks as a kind of special. I wanted to do it right across the board.
Yeah.
So I think the thing with this is it really is what you hear from the top carries on through the record.
Yeah.
Whereas with some of the last albums, there's sometimes a change in sonics, there's a change in sound within the tracks.
Yes.
I don't really know. I haven't sort of set them against each other to compare,
No.
I'm kind of...
But that's very interesting, because setting this against the other types, your peers maybe, who use, when they do horns and strings on records, things like that, there's a separation in the sound. Here's a rock band. I mean, at its worst, it's when you get Deep Purple, concerto of a group and orchestra and that kind of stuff. Here's 4 or 5 people playing like a rock group, and we've put on over the top some strings to make it sound nice. And that's completely not what this sounds like.
Well, the other thing about that kind of way of working is it's similar to the way they do film scores, that because it's an afterthought, you have to get a kind of professional, you have to get somebody in who can work fast and know how to do it. So they kind of tend to use the same motifs, the same kind of things that they know will work within the time frame. And it's exactly the same with film scores, that you finished your film and you say, right, now we need a score doing. So you hit on the same people.
Yeah.
And it means that it's you end up with an arrangement that is kind of safe, or at least if it's not very safe, it definitely leans that way.
Yeah. Thinking about it now, what I think I meant is, this sounds like a 100-piece band. Do you know what I mean? Rather than a rock band with this sounds like a 100-piece band playing. And is that what it's supposed to sound like?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's,
I should hope so now.
Yeah.
After 2 years of work.
Jason, it is genuinely, I think it's a fantastic record, and hopefully posterity will say so, and I hope, as well as the record band public, your record company would hate me if I didn't say that. It's a fantastic record. Thanks very much.
Thank you.